This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. KCM Wealth Management. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. Size is always supposed to be important, so do we want a bigger city, a bigger country? Maybe, maybe not. There are arguments for and against. But one writer on this subject says that when we discuss how big we want our community, say the city of Vancouver, to be, strangely, we seem to shyly avoid what he calls the elephant in the room, and that elephant is immigration. We are a nation, after all, of immigrants. But what is our immigration policy really doing for us that works for Canadians and for immigrants? Our guest is Martin Collacott, who is a senior fellow at the Fraser Institute, among other things, and he is probably the most distinguished person we've had on this show, as he was a diplomat with the External Affairs Department, representing Canada in Vietnam, Hong Kong, China, Nigeria, Japan. He is Chinese speaking, and that was very important when he was a member of the Canadian team that negotiated diplomatic relations with the People's Republic back in 1979. He has been High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, Ambassador to Syria, Lebanon, and Cambodia. And as I like to kid him, he's just got to come out of his shell and find something important to do with himself. Martin, great to see you. It's really such an honor to have you here. I mean, your contributions to Canada, I trust they've been recognized in some way.
Yeah, I get a pension.
Besides a pension, are you an OBE or something?
No, well, I'm busy trying to get reform to refugee policy, so I'm quite fortunate to do what I want.
Okay, let's do a couple of quick bulletin points or bullet points. You've been studying this issue and living it in a way for most of your working life. What's really good in Canadian policy about immigration, and what's really troublesome?
Well, immigration's done a lot for Canada in its history. I mean, there were times when we needed large-scale immigration to settle the West in the early part of the 20th century. If we hadn't brought in a lot of immigrants, the Americans might have settled it for us. I mean, they wouldn't have marched in, but Americans would have come up and settled it. So it's been very important.
And British Columbia might have been Wyoming too or something.
And my parents are immigrants.
Yes.
My wife's an immigrant from Asia.
Yeah.
And, Canada's a more interesting society. Because when I was a kid, it was virtually all white. Now it's a mix, and I think it's a rich society. But there are some problems. We have the highest per capita immigration levels in the world. Well, Australia plays tag with us on that, but we not only bring in about 250,000 immigrants a year, we bring in another 200,000 temporary workers. So we have extremely high levels. And it's having a major impact on a city like Vancouver. We know that we're going to have about 800,000 to 1 million more people in the city in 20 years.
Yes.
Now, is this good or bad? Because it puts a lot of stress on the city in various ways by having all those additional people. And you get all these debates on should we have more densification or should we use the agricultural land reserves and what should we do about it? Behind it all, and as you put it, the elephant in the room, is the fact that it's all driven by external immigration from abroad.
Yes.
And we have some Canadians like myself. I lived in the East before, and I've come and settled here, but almost all the increase is driven by immigration. Now, so is this good? Do we need it? Who are the winners and who are the losers, and why are we doing this?
Exactly. So, Martin, unless I've misread the things you've written about this, I haven't read them all, of course, because you've written so extensively about this matter. The sense that I'm getting from your work is that for a long time, so much of our immigration policy served us and immigrants well, but somewhere down the road, maybe 30 years ago, we started to take an odd turn, and we've created problems for ourselves and for immigrants simultaneously.
Yes.
Let's talk about those.
Well, one of the
What was the turn?
one of several things.
Yeah.
First of all, in the past, we used to increase or decrease immigration levels according to our absorptive capacity.
Yes.
If our economy needed more immigrants, we brought in more. We abandoned that policy. Well, we last had it in the 1980s when we had a recession.
Yes.
And Pierre Trudeau actually lowered, I mean, he looked at as the godfather of immigration, but he actually decreased the levels to under 100,000 for several years.
I'm smiling because the words Pierre Trudeau were on my lips.
Well, and then when the progressive conservatives came in, they pushed them back up, and for a not very good reason. They said, the Liberals seem to get all the immigrant votes. Why don't we have a go at it? And we think if we increase levels, we'll get more immigrants. They pushed them up in the early 90s when there was a recession. And we now know that when immigrants come in during a recession, they have trouble getting jobs.
Yes.
And their earnings go down. And they're actually, it's been found, they're what's called permanently scarred because they aren't able to use their skills while they're still current, and they never fully recover. So the progressive conservatives did that. When the Liberals came back in, I guess, 1993, and I don't think the Conservatives got many votes out of that policy because they only elected progressive Conservatives. They only elected 2 people in Parliament.
But was it you or your former boss, Michael Walker, who talked about the Liberals in particular loving to bring in immigrants from far abroad because they could count on their votes?
Absolutely. I mean, they began that ages ago because in 1977, they shortened the waiting period to get citizenship from 5 to 3 years. That meant they could vote earlier, and it was assumed they were all going to vote for the party that brought
them there, of course.
Now, one of the ironies is this. All political parties seem to think if they push for higher immigration levels, they're going to get the immigrant vote. What research exists shows that immigrants don't want high levels of immigration. Oh, now sometimes they want to get their parents and grandparents in. Yes. That's a special problem which we can discuss later. Yeah. But in fact, when you look at it, if you were a recent newcomer and you're looking for a job, do you want 10,000 more people coming in to look for the same jobs? Hasn't been much research done on that in Canada, but in the States they looked at 2 communities, the Hispanics, who are mostly immigrants, and the East Asians, and they found that a fairly strong majority of both communities want less immigration, not more. But the organizations that represent them and help with settlement, they want more immigration because they get government funding.
Of course.
And so you get this split in views, but political parties often assume as long as you raise immigration levels, we're going to get the immigrant. It's not true.
Let's look at the 2 broad classes of immigrants in Canadian policy, skilled workers and family class. And let's hold off on family class because that presents a real...
That's a different set of issues.
Yeah, and some thorny issues there. But, excuse me, skilled working class... current minister, immigration minister, Jason Kenney, seems to be on a bit of a tear in recent months, trying to make this work a bit better. Yeah. Tell us about what you see him doing. I'm talking about skilled workers. And do you think he's heading in the right direction?
Well, I think he's certainly improving the mix.
Okay.
One of the problems with immigration in the last 3 generations is that they haven't done nearly, immigrants who've come in since 1980, haven't done nearly as well as immigrants who came in earlier.
Yeah, why?
Immigrants who came in earlier, within 10 years, they'd caught up with Canadian wages for people with the same qualifications.
Yes.
Now, after 5 years, the average skilled immigrant is only making maybe 60% of what a Canadian makes, and he never catches up. He probably will never catch up to the Canadian. What that means for Canadians is that the benefits immigrants get, health care, social services, are much greater than what they're paying in taxes. And one Fraser Institute piece of research showed that recent immigrants cost Canadian taxpayers around $20 billion a year.
Ouch.
In terms of the benefits they get. So what Jason Kenney's been trying to do is to improve the selection process so that immigrants are going to be more successful, they'll earn more money, and he's done some things the Australians have been doing for a while. They say, look, you know, you've heard of immigrants, of doctors driving taxi cabs.
Yes.
He says what the Aussies do is before they give someone a visa, they make sure that their credentials are going to be recognized in Australia.
But there are two villains that the federal government points to, and others point to, I think in some of your works, in terms of that very problem, bringing in skilled workers that can't qualify for some reason or other. And the two villains that are pointed out are the provinces themselves, who theoretically should have no impact on immigration, but also the collegial associations, like the one that really comes to my mind is the College of Physicians and Surgeons, because I know a black man from Africa who qualified as a doctor in 32 minutes because he's from a Commonwealth country, from South Africa. Whereas I have a friend from Suzhou, China, who finally, after 12 years, is finally getting qualified. And he was an oncologist. Don't we need oncologists?
Yeah. Well, I think you've identified a real problem. One of the related to the fact that their credentials are accepted, though, and you hit the nail on the head when you said it's complicated by professional associations, by the fact that a lot of the certification is done at the provincial level. That makes it quite complicated.
Teachers, nurses, doctors.
But another issue is, up till now, we've said, well, your English isn't very good, but you got these 3 degrees from Southwest State, Sichuan, or wherever, or Kerala. So you meet our point system. The Aussies say, look, if you don't have enough English to function in your particular profession, you don't get a visa, because we're not doing you a favor by bringing you in. So there's a double problem. Do they speak enough English? They're not the only problem. Do you speak enough English? And are your credentials going to be recognized?
But Martin, you see, to me, this kind of thing is baffling, because you yourself spent a great portion of your storied career teaching people English and studying languages and teaching other people languages and so on. So if I'm running the immigration department and there's a guy coming from wherever and he's very qualified to do some job, can't I say to him, look, I want to see 6 months of English study in your home sovereign state, whatever it may be, Borneo or wherever you're from. I want to see some proficiency in English, and then you're in.
Well, the problem is
Isn't that a reasonable thing?
Up till now, we've simply said if you speak some English, you get some points. If you don't, maybe you'll get points somewhere else. And we'll train you when you get here. What the Aussies do is say, not only does the breadwinner have to have enough English to function, because it usually for a fully qualified, skilled, it takes a year or two to go through they got lots of time to learn English, but we tell them, no, we'll do it all for you when you get here. And then they get frustrated and they're sitting around. So the Aussies learn the point system from us.
And we get frustrated because the university students and their parents complain that only foreign students are getting the best seats at the university.
Well, this is another issue. I mean, the universities love it because they get much more money from so they're going to keep promoting foreign. But there's another issue beyond that one.
Hold it for a second, okay? We'll pick up that issue, whatever it may be, because we got to take a quick break and say, just remind people that you can go to davidbernard.com to send your comments and thoughts and so on. And what else do I want to tell you? Yes, and say hello to the lovely people who help bring this program to you every week here on Shaw Community Television, Cable 4. Back in a moment. KCM Wealth Management. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. If anyone knows about the ins and outs and all of the many colors of gray between the extreme positions on the subject of immigration, it's our guest Martin Collacott, who is with the Fraser Institute, and he has been not just studying this issue, but living it, breathing it, traveling around the world, representing Canada in so many places in a very, very distinguished career, so we're delighted that he's here. So I cut you off to do that little commercial break. And you were going to say there was another thing you wanted to jump on.
Well, Jason Kenney is really doing a good job of trying to improve the selection so that both immigrants are...
May I ask, in terms of the process, does a Jason Kenney come to the Fraser Institute, or do you go to, you've been before Parliament many times, I think.
Yeah, before parliamentary committees.
Yes.
The minister's usually not there.
But does someone like a Jason Kenney actually listen to folks like you?
Some of the things I've recommended I see coming up in legislation, more on the refugee side, but I think we get listened to. Now, you mentioned my connection with the Fraser Institute. That's where my research has been done. But I'm with a group called the Center for Immigration Policy Reform.
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't say
which
that,
is more an advocacy group, advocacy. And there's a very good article in today's Ottawa Citizen and Calgary Herald by the president of our group, Margaret Coppola, on the need for a national strategy.
But do you sense Kenney and people in government looking at your group at the Center for Immigration Policy Reform and going, these people are making a point?
I think they at least listen to us. They don't always agree with us. The related issue, though, I mean, Kenney has done more than any other previous minister in trying to straighten out the system. He's been quite courageous. Where I would differ, though, is that a lot of good research shows that we ought to be able to meet most labor shortages from our existing resources.
Really?
That not all of them, but that if we had better training for Canadians, if we had didn't have so many disincentives. I mean, Jason Kenney himself has pointed out that in the Maritimes, they're screaming for more foreign workers when there are people in the same communities collecting EI.
Who haven't worked for years.
And there's something dysfunctional about a country that keeps bringing in foreign workers and doesn't use its own. So the Economic Council of Canada, which put out a major report 20 years ago, said we can't really justify immigration on either economic or demographic grounds. The demographic one is the business about we have an aging population, we need more workers. We can talk about that if you want. But they said we can meet most of our labor shortages with the people here already, and there's no benefit from simply having a larger population. Prosperity means Canadians have more in their pockets, that the per capita GDP increases. Simply making the population larger and the economy larger, if it doesn't increase the well-being of individuals, doesn't mean a darn thing.
But Martin, don't we have a built-in problem, this issue of meeting our working needs with the locals, with domestic, in that we've got 2 generations or 3 generations now of Canadians who have been flat spoiled by flat screen TVs, by opulence, by comfort, and relative ease, who say, I'm not parking cars.
That's the issue. We need immigrants to do the jobs Canadians won't do.
Yeah, I'm too good to park cars, but I don't want to retrain to be a forestry worker or a fisherman or whatever.
There is an attitude problem, and I think this is reflected in the fact that we graduate a lot of people from university. Then they have trouble finding jobs. We don't have enough tradespeople, blue-collar workers who could have probably earn more than a lot of universities.
Saturday night, Martin, not my server, but the girl who follows the server around at a restaurant, she tells me she has 2 university degrees. She has a BA and an MA, and she's pretty much a bus girl.
So one of the things is we've got to try and encourage Canadians to do the work that's going to get them money. I mean, it's all very nice to say I want a university degree in some liberal arts, and then you can't find a job. And then we're short of other kinds of workers. That's one of the problems. But there is the issue raised, immigrants do the job Canadians won't do. Now, there are 2 aspects to that. One is Canadians won't do the jobs at the wages being offered, because if you're going to offer an immigrant considerably less, and the minute Jason Kenney just said now we can now pay temporary workers 15% less than you'd pay a Canadian, Canadians aren't going to take the job because it's not a living wage.
And now, as of May 1st, when the minimum wage goes up in BC, it went up last week in BC. Now we have this odd wrinkle that was in the paper yesterday, whenever, about domestic workers
Well,
being cheated and
that's another issue.
yeah,
There's a big problem there too.
Let's hold on. Let's hold on.
If
If I may, can we switch to, because this is a very big issue, the second class, the other class of immigrants, and that is family reunification. And it seems to me, Martin, I don't want to be unfair about this, but it seems to me that so many Canadians bellyache with some good reason that the immigrants who come in who are 90 years old and are just a drain on the public health system, that's inappropriate.
Yeah, I mean, it's all very nice to bring your parents, grandparents with you.
Yes.
The fact is it costs Canadians a fortune. Now, when I appeared before a Commons committee in November, using C.D. Howe, that's another think tank, C.D. Howe statistics, I calculated that the average sponsored parent costs us around $200,000 if they're here from, say, they're 65 to 85 in healthcare costs. And that the sponsored parents and grandparents that had come in since 1990 have cost the healthcare system alone $84 billion, not million, billion.
Really?
And it's all very nice to bring your parents over and then you have a babysitter and so on. But are you going to pay Canadians $192,000 to take care of their parents? So it's a hugely costly program. That's just health care. That doesn't include OAS and GIS.
When I raised the subject at a public debate that there were senior, recently immigrated citizens who weren't quite citizens yet, or maybe they had become citizens, and they were being bused to polling booths. A man who later was elected to city government started yelling at me from the audience. He was enraged.
Yeah, that's another issue. People who aren't even Canadian citizens being able to influence policy and being bused and joining more than one party so their community can influence several different groups. You know, one of the problems with having a debate, our group, the Center for Immigration Policy Reform, wants to have a public debate, an informed public debate so that Canadians know what the issues are. You're almost immediately called a racist if you raise it, because 3/4 of our immigrants are visible minorities. If you think we're bringing in too many people, they'll call you. Now, they can't call me that because my wife's a visible minority and an immigrant. But usually that shuts down the debate. There are all sorts of vested interests. For instance, the real estate industry, the construction industry loves immigration because they want to build an endless number of houses. So they give lots of money to both all the political parties in, say, the municipal level. So they all support immigration. You have immigration lawyers and consultants. You have all sorts of groups who benefit. There are winners and losers, to use a term of George Borges.
Yes, from your point of view, could a politician in this country in 2012 or in the coming years dare to say we want to limit family class immigration?
Only if there's public support and there's Jason Kenney is trying to work on that. He knows how much it costs. And he's introduced a 4-pronged strategy to try and deal with it. He says, first of all, if you want to see your parents, we'll let them have a super visa. That's a visa good for 10 years, and they can keep coming and visiting you, but they don't get permanent residence.
And they don't get
you've
all
got
the
to get
benefits.
health care insurance.
Okay.
And then he said, and for now, I'll bring in, there's 165,000 parents waiting in the backlog.
Ouch.
That will hit the cities very hard. He's going to bring in 25,000 this year, and maybe 25. That's going to, if you need medical attention, you better get it.
Martin, we've only got 3 minutes left, unbelievably. So let me quickly jump to one of the things that Kenney has spoken of twice in recent days is the lineup of millionaires in China who urgently want to come to Canada. Are we charging them enough? At the present, what do we want? $800,000 loan or something?
He wants to increase it.
So are we charging them enough to move here and so on? Do you think he's moving in the right direction on that one?
Well, yeah. In fact, I'd stop the program completely because very often, for instance, Quebec runs its own investor program. It collects their money, and then they move to BC, the vast majority, and they get the health care and they get the education. The breadwinner usually goes back to China or Hong Kong, doesn't pay taxes, come back to retire. So I would stop that program completely.
Really?
The Economic Council of Canada said we already have enough venture capital available people
Yes.
through ordinary markets. We don't need this money, and unless we really find a good use for it, it's not doing us any good. I'd stop that program.
We have 2 minutes. If you had a magic wand, what's the first one big major move you would make?
I would ask the government to really look at a total program. How do we get more Canadians into the workforce? And then immigration should complement that. We should first rely on our own resources. We would have much lower immigration levels than we have now. We'd still have some, but nowhere near where we have now. And Vancouverites, as I said in this letter, said 95% of Vancouverites don't want their city to get any larger.
Did you have a number in mind? Currently, we're bringing in 250,000 a year.
Plus 200,000 temporary workers. That's
Okay.
450,000.
Would you cut that in half?
At least. Well, it would depend partly on how the economy is doing, whether we can absorb people, but my guess is it would probably drop down to a third. The British are talking about 50,000 a year. That's equivalent to 30,000 a year here in per capita terms.
Martin, you set up that series of debates, and I'll be your moderator.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Great to have
Thank
you
you.
here. Wonderful. Martin Collacott with the Center for Immigration Policy Reform, as well as, of course, the Fraser Institute. All right, next week, boys and girls, addictions. We've talked about addictions before on this program. It's a little obsession of mine. I'm addicted to addictions. And we're going to talk to Lorinda Strang, who's the Executive Director of the Orchard Recovery Center on Bowen Island, and look at some of the odd new things that are happening with people getting addicted to new pharmaceuticals and so on, and how our approaches are working and not working. As always, davidbernard.com, the site to go to. Thanks to our wonderful sponsors, as always, and thanks for you being here on Shaw Community Television, Cable 4. Good night.